Recording in progress.
Whoa. I mean, we're ready to roll.
I think we are ready to roll. Yeah.
Okay, great. For any of you who don't know, I'm Brad Binau, member here, recently retired from 29 years of teaching at Trinity, Lutheran Seminary. And I'll say more about me in a minute and so forth. But I thought let's just first launch with Psalm 8 and take this in with as new and fresh ears as you can muster.
O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouths of babes and infants you have founded a bulwark because of your foes, to silence the enemy and the avenger. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them, mortals that you care for them? Yet you have made them a little lower than God and crowned them with glory and honor. You have given them dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under their feet, all sheep and oxen, also the beasts of the field, the birds of the air and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the sea. O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth.
Thank you. That comes for me biblically as close to the title that I threw out here for this, the Everything Everywhere All at Once. Have any of you seen that movie? It's
Mind blowing.
It's mind blowing. Entertaining and so forth, but that psalm pretty much touches on everything. It wants you to consider everything that's been made part of creation. So let me start with a question, just to get a few things on the table. There's lots to share here, and the outline will give you some idea of where we're going, and that may help steer things. I'm not totally committed to getting through every one of those bullet points today, but we'll try. But let me first just ask, I'm interested, why are you here? And I don't mean that metaphysically, cosmologically, but I mean, why did you decide to show up for this kind of a conversation? Just spit some things out quickly so we can get an idea of kind of what our orientation is here. Anyway.
I like to sing.
All right, okay. That will do.
That works on Sunday morning.
Oh, all right. I'll just say I was talking to Al out over coffee before he went in choir, and he said he wished he could come because cosmology almost made him lose his faith at one point. That's anybody else's story. Anybody else? Somebody else? Why are you here?
Curiosity.
Okay. All right.
Well, I'm a real skeptic.
Huh?
I'm a real skeptic.
Okay. About which or what?
About all of the cosmos, how it started, and who is behind it.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Would you say
That there is this God behind it.
All right, good. I mean, there are people who are skeptical of the science, and there are people who have reason to be skeptical of the theology, and maybe there's room to be skeptical of both.
I would be skeptical of the theology.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, yeah. Anybody else? Yes, no.
Well, I came into the ministry through Missouri Synod.
Okay.
At the time, the Bush takeover,
Yeah.
and so I was very sympathetic to historical criticism, and found it just an uncomfortable place to be in that denomination. So I've gotten into reading some of these books you've read, I've read too.
Okay.
And they do enter into a challenge to traditional understandings of faith.
I think anybody who's had their faith tugged at, pulled at, maybe torn apart somewhat, and then try to reassemble something that makes sense in the modern world of science and physics. There's there's a worthy challenge out in front of it. Anybody else? Okay, well, you know, as we go along, feel free to share your stories and whatnot. Let me just start with a little bit of my story. You know, what, I forget how I word, oh, yeah, a little bit of my story, there you go. So I'm a classic baby boomer. I was born in 1955, so when I was 2 years old, Sputnik launched the space age, and I grew up with now rockets and people going into space. When I was in first grade, John Glenn orbited the Earth, and my first grade teacher, Mrs. Harmon, let me stay home from school that morning to take that in, and that was a fascination. I was not at that point thinking anything about, you know, cosmology and really big picture things. That was just, I think, childhood fascination with going to outer space. It was actually many years later that I really began to understand that what we then thought of as outer space is not very outer at all. You know, you go up 100 miles, that's really called near Earth orbit. And you barely got anywhere when you do that, but it was a fascinating thing. So all through my school years, we were sending people into space. We were landing on the moon. The freshman in high school, Neil Armstrong, who spent time in my hometown of Upper Sandusky, Ohio. Thank you very much. Plaque on the UCC church. And I'm sad to say, if any of you have been following the news, the stuff coming out of my hometown about these neo-Nazi sympathizers doing their homeschooling is just heartrending, but that's another story. Anyway, by the time I got out, I think the last people landed on the moon about when I was a senior in high school. So that was, you know, that was all that stuff. By the time I got to college, though, I had enough popular sort of science, you know, and I had a sense now the universe was a lot bigger. I had also begun to take religion classes at Capitol and have many things introduced to me that were a new way to think. I have a clear and kind of crystallizing memory when I was a sophomore in college, and I was fumbling around with all this stuff and I couldn't make sense. And I knew at that point that I wanted to go into the ministry, but this became a serious challenge to my sense of call. I was at the Ohio State Michigan game in 1974. Thanks to a friend at Ohio State who gave me a ticket, sitting there in the freezing cold. And in the back of my mind, I was pondering this stuff I was having to do in my religion classes and all these questions. And I looked at this stadium full of, like, it wasn't even 180, 90,000 then, I don't remember. And it just viscerally struck me that how could God be personal enough to know something about and pay attention to every single one of these people? And this is, you know, there are billions of people in the world. And I thought, you know, the God I grew up with was certainly large enough to know me personally. I mean, that's probably a full-time job right there. But, you know, and the kids in my youth group and the people in my home church and maybe even most of the people in my 4,991 people who lived in my hometown at that point. But you got bigger than that. It blew my mind, you know, and it was, I mean, I remember just feeling anxious and like, oh my God, what is it? And so that led me to a conversation with our campus pastor at that time, Dean Piper, who gave me this book. This is not the original, this is one I bought later. Your God is Too Small, J.B. Phillips. Old book now, 1955. This didn't solve all my questions about all this, but it got me thinking in new ways. It's a really interesting book. I think it still holds up. The first half of the book, he titles Deconstruction. And he goes through some chapters of, here's ways that we think about God that just don't hold up and don't need to hold up. So set those aside. The second part, this was the stuff that it seemed like we never quite got to in my college religion classes. We did the deconstruction stuff really well. But the second part of this book is construction. Here are some ways that you can begin to rethink faith, religion, theology, God, Jesus, and so forth, and in a somewhat more open way that can accommodate science in the modern world. There are lots of other books like this out there. I just say, here's one of them. J.B. Phillips was an Anglican priest, by the way, and translated the New Testament into, I forget what it's called, modern English version or something. Now we've got the message and many other things, but really that was a helpful sort of turning point for me. So I put on the handout here just some other books that I have been finding very useful along the way. The person I'm probably going to most refer to during these weeks is a guy named John Hott. He's a emeritus professor at Georgetown University, Roman Catholic lay theologian. He's not ordained. This is probably one of the best guiding books. His book, The New Cosmic Story, Inside Our Awakening Universe. What really got me going on this stuff, though, was about last spring. I was getting a plan for teaching a course at Trinity, my last course I taught on theological leadership, and I decided, always try to have a theological theme. We do leadership stuff, and leadership theory. But what theology guides that? I thought hope has got to be the theme now, because there's just a lot of hopelessness. And I stumbled across another of John Hott's books when I Googled hope and so forth, God After Einstein. And he gives reasons to be hopeful and so forth. And that got me back into reading more of John Hott and so forth. Next week, I'll be pulling a lot of things from his book, God After Darwin, and then we'll get into God After Einstein later. One other book, I don't know why Roman Catholics and Anglicans seem most interested in this. Angela Tilby, who's an Anglican. This book is a little older, actually, but in the course I teach, Care of Souls, I did teach this book surface, God, Self, and the New Cosmology. And how do you think about what the tradition means by soul? Very interesting. She produced a BBC series back in the 90s on some of this stuff. So already, and then as a dated already, in the 1990s, this was pre-Webb telescope, which has opened all kinds of things. Okay, enough of that. What I'm hoping we can get after here is a way to think about, I like to think that's good, how to think about God in light of what we now have to think about with all of the science and physics that are coming at us. And one of the conclusions that John Hott has helped me come to, but I own this, the church, our Western theological tradition, basically, offers us a God who is far too terrestrial, too earthly. And I was mindful as we recited the creed this morning, we believe in God who created the heavens and the earth. Well, parenthesis, and a whole hell of a lot of other stuff too. I mean, it's just out there. Because when we say when we pray, our Father in heaven. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense to people in a day and age who lived on a flat earth with a dome that held up the heavens, and heaven was literally up and out and above. I'm not here to debunk the concept of heaven, but I do think we have to re-understand what that might mean, because the Bible, which is not a science book, has given us images, metaphors, symbols to conceptualize the grandeur of God. And the problems only start when we look, and I love this image somebody put out. It's like what you do with a prism. If you look at the prism, you don't see anything. If you look through the prism, then you see how the light spectrum, fans out. That's what the Bible is in many ways. That's what all religious symbols are. If you just look at them, it's kind of flat and two-dimensional. When you look through them, you begin to see on the other side. This is what the Eastern religious tradition, Eastern Orthodoxy, is all about with icons. It's not the this that's there, it's what you see through that to open you to new possibilities and reality. So in some ways what we're doing here is iconography. Okay. All right. So we're here to talk about cosmology, which is, I'll define these in a minute more precisely, but everything everywhere all at once, theology and religion. But when I was talking to John Disbrow a week or so ago, because I was worried about whether this class was going to fly, and say, what do you think people want to hear, and all that sort of stuff. He helped me come to an understanding that there's a third thing we can't leave out, which is, I just call shorthand, psychology. It's where all this lands for us in our own possibly anxious mind, because that was certainly what was happening to me back in college days. Like, you know, can I hold this together? Can I believe any of this stuff? Does it have any meaning anymore? And through more learning, and actually when I taught some stuff on death and dying, I learned a new phrase, it was new to me. The loss of your assumptive world. Just ponder that. What it means when you lose your assumptive world. This is why death is so difficult for us. When someone close to us dies, we just assume that they're part of our lives. We plan with them, we care for them, they care for us, and that's gone. Or we imagine us not being here. Well, can you really imagine a world in which you don't exist? That's a great thought experiment sometime. Try that. You know, what would this class be like if you weren't sitting in there? Would you be remembered? Would anybody care? Would it go the same direction because you're not here to offer insights or input? So I think when the science of cosmology lands in one's modern lap, unless you're completely tone deaf or something, it's bound to raise some question about the loss of your assumptive world. And that, I'm here to say, is not a bad thing. That is a good thing. As long as you've got some places to talk it through and think about it and get some useful information. If you don't, I think you will sequester yourself in a very narrow, comfortable vision of a very, I would say, terrestrial God, and try to ignore the implication of whatever it is that science has been now trying to tell us in the modern world. Okay. Let me say then finally on this part about my story. It may well be the case that nobody here has become as fascinated with all this stuff as I am. My wife is very worried about that as I keep telling her what I'm reading, and she said, "You're really into this, aren't you?"
But if you make us think, if you make us think.
Okay, well, good. All right. Then that's what I hope to do. This should be a time of many more questions than answers, but framing good questions is the first step toward real growth in anything. And if you're not willing to ask hard questions, then you don't really get anywhere. We can struggle with those. So as you're along for the ride, I mean, if you're not as interested, you don't have to come back next week or whatever. I won't hurt my
Can't test this till after 4 weeks.
Yeah. But one of the most recent part of my story that really got me thinking about this, I don't know, some 5-10 years ago, I started thinking about the way that we throw around the term the end of history, the end of the world. We talk about the end of the world, quote, as if it will be the end of history. Theologians are good to talk about the end of history. You know? And I was remembering that story about remember this guy Harold Camping? He was predicting the end of the world. This was about 10 or 15 years. He made a couple, 3 or 4 tries at it each time. He wrote a book called, in 1992, he wrote a book called 1994, and that didn't happen, and he pushed it up. Finally, after the last time it didn't happen, as the story goes, he was so depressed and dejected, his following was deserting him, and somebody came up and said, Harold, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. I do want us to think hard about that, though. This little planet of ours could be incinerated tomorrow by some asteroid or nuclear war, or it'll just pan out over the next, I don't know, 5 billion years, I think is what they say. Maybe that's how long our sun is going to last. And I remember that story. Carl Sagan, remember him? A funny kind of a voice, you know, he's giving a lecture and he's saying to the group, you know, so our sun is gonna burn out in about 5 billion years. Some guy in the back, what'd you say, how long is that? 5 billion years. Stop. Thank God, I thought you said a million. Yeah, so it's just, it's mind blowing, right? But when the Earth is no longer here, as almost assuredly the time will come when that happens, that's not the end of history. I mean, trillions of galaxies out there with who knows how many other whatevers, you know, it's a big place. So we have to think about what we mean when we talk about the end times, the end of history, or whatever, and not just do that casually, I don't think. Okay, so just a few terms here. So we know we're talking about theology, cosmology, and then what we call big history. So the theology, I want to say, is how we think about God. Really. The discourse and the conversations that have transpired since the beginning of human thought, probably. Religion, then, is how we practice the things we think about God. The theology is more of a thought process. Religion is how you practice that. And what you do with your theology, I would say, is what you actually believe. You don't do anything with the stuff you're talking about. That's just religious chit chat stuff. It's do you put that into motion? That's really what your religion is. Cosmology, I've mentioned this to some people, and they say, "Oh, cosmetology." Well, no, we're not reading Cosmos magazine or Cosmo, whatever. Cosmetology is the scientific conversation that goes on, or the discourse about the development of everything, the universe as a whole, not just Earth science, not just our solar system, but it's the biggest possible picture you can stretch. It's the story of I would say where everything came from, how it got to this point, what's happening now, and where it's all going. That's cosmology. And what we're aiming for here is some kind of intelligent conversation intersection between science and religion. By the way, another great book, John Polkinghorne, who was a physicist at Cambridge, and then in his life got ordained, went to theology, and became an Anglican priest. And then later went back to be a dean at Cambridge. But this, again, a book from the 90s, a little bit different, but still, serious talk, science and religion and dialogue. That's what we're trying to do. And I just recently read, if you want some fun bedtime reading, little book John Polkinghorne wrote, Quantum Theory, a very short introduction, 90 pages. And he's got a way of actually making it intelligible. I don't know if we'll get to anything about quantum theory today. That's why we may or may not. But, okay. So, big history then. What do we mean by that? That's a term that people who like to reflect on cosmology, both from the theological and scientific points of view, they use that term to expand, because let's face it, when you think about history, I mean, when you took a history class in high school or college, where did you start? Anybody? I mean, what was the beginning point of a history class that you once had? The Dark Ages? Okay, all right. Went back to
Sumer.
How's that?
Sumer, beginnings of civilization.
Okay, all right. But we're still talking about human history, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So most of what we think of, I think, just shorthand history is human history. Now, there are some folks who are talking about free history, but that's still human history in a sense. We talk about human history as recorded history. Prehistory is that there were people out there, but nobody had language and wasn't, there weren't any typewriters as well, so we didn't write that stuff down. Big history is pushing way past all that to say a lot was going on before we ever showed up here. Now, already that's on the assumption that we're going to take the process of evolution seriously. and not try to argue our way around fossil records and so forth. We'll get into that more next week. But so, why are there all these books here? We're not doing Luther's works here. There happened to be 30 volumes here, and that was convenient. So this represents the history of everything from where we're sitting right here in 2023 to the Big Bang. Okay. 13.8 billion years. Yeah, give or take, I don't know, a few hundred million probably or something like that. But the Webb telescope has now everybody's pretty much in agreement that because we can look at infrared imaging from the most distant galaxies, and you break that down in ways I can't explain. I'm not a physicist. I'll just trust them on the science. Yeah, give or take a billion, I don't know, a couple hundred million anyway, 13.8 billion. Okay. So let's just see, where we are on the time frame. John Pott has this image. If you consider every one of these volumes to have 450 pages, they don't. Some are close, some not. But let's just say they're all equally 450 pages. If you give 1,000,000 years to every page, okay, so 450 million, almost 500 million years per volume. Not quite, but almost. Okay. So we go all the way over here to volume 1, page 1, and you get the Big Bang. Now, can you see the little dot in there? Okay, that's probably 100 times bigger than what scientists say in actuality was there at the Big Bang. Okay, get your head around it. Okay, every single tangible thing in the entire universe that you could possibly lay your hand on was compressed into whatever it was that banged at the Big Bang. Okay. Now, there's a lot of science that goes into it. Now, there are also, just aside, some scientists would say this maybe was only the big bounce, and it wasn't the Big Bang. It might have been, there might have been bangs or bounces before that. This is just what we have in front of us now. But going backwards, kind of reverse engineering all the way back to the beginning, all the energy in the universe was condensed into about the head of a pin. And in the first microseconds of that was this release of energy in just unbelievable amount of heat that got everything going. Okay, so we'll just do this on our cosmic timeline up here. T equals 0, time at 0, that's the beginning of the Big Bang. Okay, so you got the Big Bang. All right. Now, I don't know if you can tell, but from volume 1 up to volume 20. All right, so that's about what, 2/3 of it. It's many people would say nothing was happening. Everything banged and just kind of sat there. Not true, but I mean that's the impression you get. You come to volume 20, which is about year 9 billion. Okay, and that's when you get the coalescing of our solar system, which is all, that's all we can kind of really know much. What was happening in other galaxies and solar systems, we're not too privileged to that, but we can go, at least in terms of our stuff, 9 billion years, which puts you at 13.5, so it's about in here somewhere, I suppose. We get to our solar system. Now things, so that's a little bit longer than a long weekend, okay? That's a long right? Stuff. Well,
Yeah, but during that period, I think we need to mention that all these galaxies were forming all over the known universe. There was a lot going on.
And we're simply not privileged there. So I'm kind of moving us into our terrestrial view of things. But you're right. However, even here in the first moments of big banginess or whatever, there are no atoms, there are no molecules, there are particles, or the raw material out of which life would eventually come, but there weren't even, I mean, there were no elements on the periodical table. Yeah, I don't know how many billion years did, I don't know. It took a while, but eventually you get the kind of elements you need to create. So it's a pretty extended thing. Okay, so then you get to volume 21, and we now have the kind of first evidence of life on Earth. I mean, single cell type, whatever, amoebas and, something. So that's volume 21 kind of here. I don't know wherever that goes. This is, don't put that to scale. Can't even draw a straight line up there, let alone.
But it's not until the end of the volume 21. If I see your
Yes,
thing
exactly.
correctly.
So that's about 9.9.5 billion years into the deal. Then we skip along for quite a while with life is out there in the primordial stew or whatever, and we're only able to talk about Earth, and we can get into what extraterrestrial, but okay. Then we get here at volume 28, which is about year 13 billion. A lot of time has passed before we have any fossil records or indication that there were actually multicellular organisms of some sort. So now we're up here getting close to the present, but up to this point, just to be aware of, and you're right, stuff was going on, but what hasn't been going on yet is any self-conscious capacity to think about all this. There is no sentient creature yet who's able to ponder where it all came from or ask the metaphysical question of why am I here? Right? We're not even there yet. We're 13 billion years into the game. Okay. Volume 29, somewhere about the middle of volume 29, we get to what the paleontologists call the Cambrian period, which is a time when the fossil record shows us that, over some millions of years, it didn't happen overnight, but we now start seeing fossil evidence of complex life forms. Molecules have come together, multicellular things, moving creatures and whatever. So I don't know, 29, let's put it over there, whatever, at the point. And now, notice we've got 3 or 4 things going on in volume 30, right, which are worth noting. Wait a minute, got the wrong. Start the wrong end there. Near the front end, in volume 30, about halfway through, the dinosaurs appear. Now, the dinosaurs appear at 13.57 billion, give or take a half a billion, I don't know, into this whole long deal, right? And we think of that as absolutely ancient primordial history, which it is, but it's still, when you think about it, this is only 225 million years ago. A mere quarter of a billion. Well, hardly anything when you think about the big stretch. Then, let's see, where are we? Oh, well, the next thing that happens is the dinosaurs go extinct, right? Asteroid or whatever it is hits in the Yucatan Peninsula, throws all this stuff up in the air, global cooling, most life forms can't survive, the cockroaches survive, however, kind of a cleansing of all kinds of life go extinct. However, this does pave the way for other things. So that's a mere 66 million years ago. Whatever, they go extinct. Still nothing with conscious thought has appeared on planet Earth. Nothing that we know of was walking in a bipedular, 2-footed way like we do. No primates yet, or anything like that. And then we're now about page 444 out of the 450 in the last volume here of the whole deal, okay, you get something like upright human ancestors as a Homo erectus and pre-species prior to what we now call ourselves as Homo sapiens. So that's about 6 million years ago, okay, which means it's only, that's year 13.794 billion. Again, give or take, you know, whatever, but that's, I mean, that's really recent history, except, you know, we may study about that in some geology class or something, when you get to that point. And then when you get to the last page of the last volume, page 450 of the 30th volume, right up now into the 13.8 billion year, you get what we call modern humans. So somewhere between this and this, we now have the development and the evolution of consciousness. People who can actually think about the fact that they're thinking about what they're thinking about, if that makes sense. Okay. So that's about 300,000 years ago. That's what we now suspect is those first what come close to what we would call modern humans with the capacity for thought and language and tool making and all that kind of stuff. Somewhere in Africa probably first emerged and then spread out. I mean, now I just gotta put them over here. I don't know. Think about that. Something like us has only been here for 300,000 years. Now, anybody mind now blown by trying to comprehend that? That's why cosmology is fun and complicated. All right. So I'm at the bullet point about an awakening universe. It seems as if, you know, what we know is really interesting stuff is all going like from the dinosaurs on. But as was mentioned previously, it doesn't mean nothing was happening back here. Those elemental particles coming together as atoms and molecules and whatever, something is happening. And as John Hott points out, whenever you have something happening, you have a story. And that means that's why he titled this book, I think, the new cosmic story, a new way of looking at this. So the universe, as best we can discern, is the story is still unfolding. And it does seem there might be a plot to all this. So if you think about the science that stands behind it, John Hott would say that's like grammar. You know, there are certain rules. If you're going to tell a story, every language has subject and verb. I mean, you just have to have, you know, things and actions, whatever. And then you refine that with the more you learn certain rules of grammar to tell a decent story. But Strunk at White or whatever, Chicago Manual of Style, or anything, they don't write the story for you. They just give you some parameters in which you can have a meaningful story. That's sort of what science gives us, is some grammar tools to work with. But that's different from the plot. And that's the difference between physics and what we would call metaphysics, which ask those deeper questions about not just what's here, but what does it mean that anything is here? And what is all this trying to tell us? So if you can buy into the notion that the universe is still being born, and this is something we all need to pause and think about. It is not as if everything in the moment of creation, however you want to envision that, was fixed and set and ideal. And then somehow it all got screwed up in the next 13.8 billion years. And the goal that God is trying to do is get back there and fix everything and make it like it was supposed to be in the beginning. There's a lot of theology that would endorse that and embrace that. I happen to think that doesn't work very well. it's better to think of it as it's all been going somewhere and waking up to something, which means I don't know how far that timeline goes out and around it 2 billion times. But we're in process. So in that sense, next week we'll talk about evolution. We're not just talking about how some organism came out of the slime and walked on Earth and all that. The whole story is evolving. Our consciousness is evolving. Religion is part of the process of evolution, right? We get to a point where we start actually self-consciously thinking about what stands behind all this. Okay. One of the ways to think about what the plot line might be then, John Locke refers to this as indestructible rightness. That's a little bit of a tricky concept because it doesn't mean morally right, but I think it's what traditional theology refers to as the reign of God. The coming together of things in a way that ultimately will make sense, that will be right. And so I don't know what kind of word we might use to do that, but that with lots of fits and starts and bumps, the long story of an awakening universe seems to be pointing toward the fact that things are in fact coming together. We've developed a consciousness actually to think about this. It doesn't mean we can't do great harm, to what that story is about, but that we're caught up in that and we're somehow part of that. Okay, here's what I want to spend. We've got about 15 minutes. Okay. So the question then becomes, how do you read this story if we can find the notion that this long process is some kind of a story? There are different ways to read stories, right? So I've got 3 of them here on the handout. Let's see what we can do. The word that John Locke gives to the first is archaeonomy. And I'll try not to use this very often, but that's a fancy term for what we might also call scientific materialism. The term arche from Greek means beginning, and so it's a way of going back to the beginning and reading the story by saying we have to do archaeology, in other words, to go back to the first thing and figure it all out. Scientific materialism would say that from the moment of the Big Bang, everything was set in motion inevitably to be what it now is. The laws of physics were going to prevail, such that certain elements had to come into being and had eventually, with some fits and starts, with the evolutionary process weeding out the stuff that we couldn't make it because the laws of physics wouldn't uphold it. And you're here at this moment as you are because everything was set in motion at a moment to get you here. Follow that? I mean, this is the conventional thinking of the sort of new atheism movement, but plenty of other scientific folks. So there's no need for anything other than the laws of science and physics and geometry to get us where we are. In my field, in pastoral theology, an interesting parallel, this is also pretty much the point of view of psychotherapy, which says you figure yourself out by going back to the beginning, back to your toilet training or what happened during your birth process or whatever, and then you track forward. There are other ways of thinking about that, though, of contemplating one's future. There are therapies that ask you to write your future story. Where is this going? And so, Teilhard de Chardin, I don't know if anybody knows him, Roman Catholic scientist, whatever. John Locke's one of his modern interpreters. Chardin pointed out that if you want to know what a river is all about, you don't go to the point of origin. If you want to find out about Mississippi, you don't go up to that whatever lake. What is that lake in Minnesota?
Itasca.
Yeah, okay, right.
I was like, which one?
Well, it starts where the Mississippi is. you can't really know about the majesty of the Mississippi River by going back to its sort of Big Bang moment. You've got to go down to the Louisiana Delta. You got to go to the estuary. You got to see what's coming out of that, and then contemplating the, what the ocean means. And so you can only really know by trying to get an angle on it from the future. So this is useful for scientific purposes in many ways, but it metaphysically doesn't help us ask questions about kind of where it's all going. Now, the second way of kind of reading the story that I think is the most challenging, because we all do it, is by way of analogy, which says, okay, I can look at the earth and the stars and the cosmos and everything, and these things are just they're a faint image of the heavenly, which is out there in some other place. And this is extremely influenced by Greek philosophy, and not very much at all by the kind of Hebrew thinking that went into most of the writing of our Bible. Anybody ever read C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce? It's not a marriage counseling book. But, okay, so just real quickly, in that book, C.S. Lewis envisions people who are sort of in this purgatory place, and they have a chance to go sample heaven and then decide if it's really for them or not. Well, C.S. Lewis was extremely Platonic and analogical, because he describes heaven as someplace that's much more real. The grass there is so hard, it's so real, it hurts your feet. The light is so bright, you can hardly stand it. Well, a lot of what we do theologically is to think about things that way, that this is not reality. Reality is somewhere out above us in a heaven up above us, right? I mean, that kind of thinking made sense when earth was flat and heaven and all that stuff. A lot more we could say about that, but we'll be picking up this theme as we go along. So let me just get to the last part here. Anything else about that? Probably not. Well, okay. What to be biblically faithful, there's a way to look at the story that we might call anticipatory, which John Hott says this is the Abrahamic way of reading the story. This is actually the most faithful biblical way to read the story. Abraham, who is drawn forward by a promise, not knowing what's out there, where he's going, but that this somehow is going to hang together and have meaning. And so you read the story with a sense of anticipation, that the fulfillment of it all is out here in the future somewhere. But not try to bend your mind around. So where is God in this process? God is
Luring.
Huh?
God is luring.
Yes, because God is always out front of us in our future, pulling everything forward more than pushing it out from the Big Bang. You can kind of get a sense of that. God is always just beyond our full grasp, but Jesus says, the kingdom of God, the reign of God is now at hand. It's already here, but it's not fully here yet. It's never, at some point. So there's the Alpha, God is Alpha and God is Omega, right? God is beginning, God is end. Chardin said, good enough, God is, however, a lot more Omega than Alpha. We need to think of God as the God that is pulling everything forward, not the Alpha that just got it started, because then you can get into ways of looking at the cosmos. Yeah, God banged it all out. He pretty much left it alone, and just let it go to the inevitable place that God wants it to be, as if everything is already ordered and preordained and so forth. And this is what we'll get into next week. The evolution, however, brings out the possibility of actual novelty in the universe within the rules of cosmic grammar. Whatever, but within some framework of patternedness, novelty can happen. Because how do we get to the point then in the long history where complex life forms develop a sense of consciousness? That's, now, again, be very careful to say it's not, we're not trying to wave a magic God wand and say boom, and then a miracle happens, and, you've seen that cartoon, the guy's doing a big equation on the blackboard, and then he writes down it, and then a miracle occurs, and the answer is X over 10 or something. And his mentor said, you need a little more work on this last step. We're not trying to say that. I mean, although it's tempting, but can't go there. But we do have to account for the fact that something really new is emerging. Now, so completely to blow our minds on this, one of the things that implies then is if we are at the point of Homo sapiens, I would say almost utter certainty that in another 500,000 years, the history that's written is going to see that human life, as we call it, has evolved a little bit further. For one thing, many people are saying human thumbs are now going to become much more important because we're texting all the time, right? It's true. It's little things like that. So by chance, some things, novelty enters in and things shift. Our brains are probably going to get bigger. That's one of the things we see with fossil records, the humanoid brains begin to get much more big and complex because they had to handle a lot more information and challenges and whatnot. Okay. Unless you're all just dying to hear something about quantum theory, pause on that. There's only one other short thing I want to just mention before we close. But with all that on the table, where are you with all this stuff? Wow.
I think AI could come into and actually make our brains smaller.
Oh, that could also.
I mean, you can have news stories written by AI. Doesn't take a reporter.
Right. I think that's a great insight. We don't know where artificial intelligence will take the cosmic story here.
It finishes sentences. It finishes knowledge.
And we don't know, is that an advancement in the unfolding of this awakening universe, or is it one of those burps that sets things back for a while? But we don't know. Yes, Bill.
I'm kind of at the place where Alan Watts said, something unknown is doing we know what was in this line here.
Yeah, right. And I would say yes, and as long as we don't fall into the line of thought that says, well, and science can't really know what's going on either. I think I would want to stay open that there's hard science out there that I don't know how we can ignore it. But science can help us get at the what and the how questions, not so much the why and the wherefore questions, and that's where there's room for this kind of thinking.
Well, and also, just like consciousness, we're a product of that.
Yeah.
Science is a human product too.
Well, right. And this is one of the criticisms of the scientific materialists and so forth, that they're convinced they have come to a way of reading the universal story, but don't seem to be aware that their own consciousness is what's brought them there. Consciousness. Well, you have a lot of directions. Yeah. Anybody else? Because I'm trying to, I haven't carefully scripted the next 3 weeks. I wanted to kind of see where we were today, and then, but so help me out here with how all this is landing.
Well, think about it.
Go ahead, Julie.
I've never been a good one at science, and this is just, you've done this in a way that's just captured me and made me want to buy a couple of books. So, get ready for next week. I'm all, you've made it really understood. Yes, thank you. Yeah, the visuals are very effective.
And that's really scary because I don't really know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Another question I have in the back of my mind is, when you go through our Lutheran worship service, you see how tied it is to one particular image of this.
And we can probe this further. I think we are very tied to an analogical way of thinking. And I'm convinced that this is why church life is not very attractive to a millennial Gen Z generation. Why my own kids said, thank mom and you're into that, but it just doesn't do anything for us. It doesn't relate. It's boring. And I think that's true. If we're gonna go anywhere, I mean, I think all of us are here in part because we've come to a place that philosophers call our second naivete. You had a first naivete in your childhood years when it wasn't hard to believe in God as kind of the equivalent of Santa Claus or something, just the one who makes everything happen. And then somewhere you bumped into science and threw you for a loop. The second naivete is the ability to affirm the goodness, the rightness, the purpose of the story, but you've gotten past the literal stuff and found a place to accommodate some modern insight. And the modern accumulation of knowledge is not going to slow down. I mean, now that we've got space telescopes and all kinds of other things, it's really going to speed up until we find another thing that'll make us start in a new place. The Rachel room.
Yes.
Wow. Go ahead.
Couple of thoughts. When we were talking about cosmology, thank you. I was reflecting on there's multiple cosmologies in the Bible.
Well, the metaverse idea, right?
And then there's the Romans and the Greeks had their own cosmology. There was a big fight about cosmology 500 years ago between Galileo and the church, and we're kind of there again.
Yes. If I can, I would say at each one of those moments, I think you can touch on that idea of the loss of an assumptive world. So, the Roman Catholic Church was losing its power because of Galileo and Copernicus. And that assumptive world is going away fast, and then there's a reactivity that comes in. So we see that with the fundamentalist modernist controversies, basically 100 years ago, which followed 50 or so years after Darwin.
Yeah. But also, we had the assumptive reality of Newton.
Yeah, right.
That ended with Einstein.
Yeah, that's
and then after Einstein's already on the case.
Yeah.
So that idea of it's happening quickly.
Yes.
And there's also John Thurman. He's a professor at Union. He just put out. I saw him tweet a couple of days ago, and he goes, "I keep talking to students who are burnt out fighting for justice.
Yeah.
And they are looking for the spiritual resources to have to be able to fight for justice." I think the anticipatory model that you're presenting, not just because you wrote process theology beside it,
didn't even get there yet.
it's a different way of telling the story that allows for hope that I think the church could use as we are fighting multiple pitched battles right now.
Well,
And
you give me a great place to land here. This is exactly where I want.
this is what I try to do.
I'll point to this quote that I put on here from the God After Einstein book that John Hott, the Roman Catholic historian, says the purpose of theology is to give us reasons for our hope. And that's 1 Peter 3. Always be ready to make your defense to anyone who demands from you an account for the hope that is in you. I think we can't do that process intelligently without taking cosmology into consideration. So why, at a very absolutely practical social justice level, why does any of this matter? Found this article in the Dispatch here about 2 weeks ago. I don't know if you saw this. This is mind-blowing to me. The headline was LGBTQ people, comma, allies, dodge fines in North Dakota. You see this? So, North Dakota lawmakers rejected a bill Friday that would have made people pay $1,500 each time they refer to themselves or others with gender pronouns different from the ones they were assigned at birth. I'm not.
It would kind of like base it off of like genes.
Yeah, right. So
Which doesn't actually.
exactly. So I mean, I'm not making this up. This is that they were actually considering a bill with, well, and it was defeated. And because Republican Senator, North Dakota State Senator Jane Meardahl, whoever she is.
Yana Meardahl.
Huh?
Yana Meardahl.
Yana. Oh, you know this country.
Oh, yeah.
That's on Christmas card list or what? Okay. Well, she said she voted against the bill, but said she plans to support others because she thought there were some technicalities that would make this too hard to enforce, and she wanted to clean it up, make it more refined. She plans to support others to align with her belief, quote, that God gives you your identity and your sex at conception. Now, I just want to say, when you take an archaeonomic worldview that everything is basically, and this is really odd because I'm sure she's not in the camp of Richard Dawkins or Daniel Dennett, right? But the fundamentalists and the scientific materialists have an awful lot in common. They're fundamentally both believe that if evolution is true in any sense, then there is no God. They're united on that point, right? They're both, okay. But she's taking a point of view that says everything is predetermined at the beginning. There's no capacity in this kind of thought for new things actually happening in creation, that the universe is awakening, that we're all still evolving, and so this may seem like just an interesting scientific thought exercise, but you get right down to people being fined money because then we're talking about something.
Or passing laws, that's the bottom line,
Yeah.
is that they're actually considering
Well,
passing
Well,
laws.
but think what it would mean if that law were to go into effect. How are you gonna? I heard Dave, you know, saying that Naomi should be referred to as he. You owe $1,500. I mean, who knows what's gonna be worse than that? And now we're talking about something really truly Orwellian and dystopian. Okay, I don't need to land on a real counter there, but only to say that this is relevant. This is relevant. So
it blows my mind that in a state like North Dakota, which is so dependent on agricultural economy, where everybody is into breeding livestock and crops and using, how can they not see it? How?
Well, and not to mention a lot of Lutheran. That's part of the problem. I was taking back to this idea of the loss of your assumptive world. If you are too threatened by new ways to think, if your God is really too small and not big enough to accommodate what our own evolving consciousness is discovering, you're going to get very stuck and reactionary and do desperate things to try to hold on to a way to make sense out of the universe.
But their whole economy is based on evolution.
But here's your problem. You're trying to think about this logic.
Yeah, that is my problem.
I've had to say that to many people in the life of logic. When you get to the level of what threatens you existentially, logic does not prevail. No, and so, but that's the kind of logic
Fear prevails.
Right, you have to incorporate then the logic of the illogic. That this is what we should expect because we are sentient creatures who have a sense of threat and fear, and we don't only die, we think about the fact of our own extinction before it happens. Anyway, want the last word?
Um,
I'm sorry, we're over here.
like, what you're pointing to is this looking backwards to discover, whatever, is really a theology of death.
Yes.
Right, because, life requires creativity. But also thinking about a situation in North Dakota, or the bills that are being passed in West Virginia that would imprison transgender people, or the 25 and unders in Arizona that just were forcibly detransitioned a week ago. It's not the instability of the trans identity or the instability of having your conceptions shaken. But also we live in the American Empire, which is a trauma factory. Right?
Well, let me see if I can capture it with this.
Right.
Language.
There's
Yeah.
the trauma aspect of it that I don't think a lot of people think of when they're trying to have that.
No disagreement.
Yeah.
I'll leave you with this side, this can capture it. We refer to ourselves as human beings. When in fact, being is a rather static concept. Better, with the anticipatory way of reading the universe, to think of ourselves as human becomings. Yeah, okay, because we don't know really what the end game is, and we're maybe a step along the way towards something. We are more becoming than just always. Well, because the being thing means, well, then our being was fixed at a certain point and we didn't move anywhere. Which we'll get to this by the end of our week together, but that means, here's a way then to think about what sin means. That sin is unbecoming.
Yeah.
That's Ted Peters with that, but sin is not very attractive, it's unbecoming, it diminishes life as we know it. But it also means it's working against, it's things we do that work against the process of allowing this awakening to draw us forward. Anything that stands in the way of our becoming, whatever the plot line is all about, is what we could call sin. It's not just more, you drank enough on Saturday night or whatever, play cards. I mean, that's such a stupid stuff compared to what we're talking about.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
Thanks for the overtime here.
Wow.
I want to pick up on inside outside story next week, and then we'll get into evolution. Okay, and what it is.